This video tutorial I will explain how to use native SQL queries. Here you can see query method. Till now we have used JPA to create the record, update the record, delete the record and get the record from the database. And in case of JPA, method name is important. Based on the method name, the SQL query will be automatically generated by the framework. In this case, it will generate SQL query like this. Select star from users table where user ID equal to the whatever value we are passing. So based on that, user entity object will be written back. In case of native SQL query, method name is not important. And we have to use query annotation, and here we have to pass the native SQL query. And we have to specify native query equal to true. While writing native SQL query, we have to use proper table name and proper column names. In this case, here you can see users table, it has these many columns. And here you can see the example of native SQL query. Select star from users table, this one, where user underscore ID equal to the parameter which we are passing in this method. And user underscore ID is the column name. Here I have defined the interface user repository. Here I have defined the method find all users with confirmed email address. And I am passing pageable. And this method returns page and which contains user entity. And here I have applied query annotation. Value I am passing native SQL query. Select star from users table where email verification status is true. And native query we have to specify as true. And here we are using pageable. So I have to give count query. And here is the count query. Select count star from users table where email verification status is true. Now we will see how to write JUnit integration test to test this method. Here I have defined the class user repository test, which is JUnit test class. Since we are writing JUnit integration test, I have applied Spring Boot test annotation and extend with annotation. And here I have auto-wired user repository because we are going to test this user repository. And here I have defined the boolean records created as false. And in setup method, if record is not created, I am calling create user records method. And in this method, I am creating 3 users. And 2 of the users, I have set email verification status as true. And one of the user, I have set email verification status as false. Here I have defined the method test get verified users to test this method. And here I have created a pageable object. Then I am calling find all users with confirm email address method of user repository object and passing the pageable, and it returns pages. And here I am asserting pages should not be null, and from pages object I am getting the content which returns user entity list, and user entity list should not be null. Here I am asserting, and it should contain 2 records. Here you can see argdb, and it does not have any tables. Now what I am going to do is I am going to run this JUnit test case in debug mode. Since it is JUnit integration test, it will start the server. Click on refresh, and here you can see users table is created, and it has 3 records. because in setup method we are creating three users records, and in that email verification status is false is one record, and email verification true is two records. And if you see, we got two records with email verification status as true. And this step also will pass because it contains two records. And if you see, JUnit test result is passed. Now we will see native SQL query with positional parameters. If you see this query, select star from users where email verification status is true. In this case, the value true is hard coded, and most of the cases we should not hard code the value. In that case, we can use positional parameters or named parameters. First, we will see how to use positional parameters. Here I have defined the method find user by name and passing first name and last name as parameters, and this method returns a list of user entity. And here I have applied query annotation, and value I am passing native query, and here I have mentioned native query equal to true. And here you can see the query, select star from users where first name equal to question mark 1, which means it is argument 1 which will be replaced by this first name value, and last name equal to question mark 2, which means argument 2, and argument 2 will be replaced by last name value. Here I have defined the JUnit test method. The method name is test find user by name to test this method. Here I am calling find user by name method of user repository object, and passing first name as Roy and last name as P. This method returns user entity list, and here I am asserting user entity list should not be null, and size should be equal to 1. And in the setup method I am creating three users, and one of the users first name is Roy and last name is P. So when this query is executed, it returns a list which contains one user entity object. Before run the JUnit test case, empty the database. Now I am going to run this JUnit test case in debug mode, and it will start the server, and it creates tables, and insert these three users in the users table. Here you can see three users are created, and one of the user first name is Roy, last name is P. And here you can see the JUnit test case has been passed. Now we will see how to write native SQL query with named parameters. Here I have defined the method find user by email, and here I am passing email ID, and this method returns a list of user entity object. And in this method, I have applied a query annotation, and here I am passing the native SQL query. Select star from users where email equal to colon email ID. This is the named parameter, and this name should be equal to in at parameter whatever name we are giving, and this named parameter value will be replaced by whatever value we are passing here. And here I have specified native query equal to true. Here I have defined the JUnit test method. The method name is test find user by email. To test this method, here I am calling find user by email method of user repository object and passing the email ID, and it returns user entity list. And here I am asserting user entity list should not be null, and size should be equal to 1. And in the setup method, I am creating 3 users, and one of the user email ID is roy@yahoo.com. That is what I am passing here. Empty the database, and I am going to run this JUnit test case in debug mode. It is starting the server and create the tables. Then 3 users will be inserted. And here you can see 3 users are created. One of the user email ID is roy@yahoo.com. We got one user entity, and here you can see the JUnit test result, and it is passed. Now we will see how to log SQL queries and their values in the console, and this is used to debug the code. And these 3 key value pairs we have to add it in the application.properties file, and the first key value pair enable display the SQL in the debug mode, and second key value pair is used to display the positional parameter and their values, or display the named parameters and their values, and this key value pair is used to format the SQL. Here you can see application.properties file. In that I have added the 3 key value pairs. Empty the database. Run these JUnit test cases. Here you can see whatever SQLs are used, that is printed here. And here you can see insert into users table, and these are the column names and positional parameters. And here you can see for each positional parameters what are the values. First positional parameter email ID, like that fifth positional parameter first name, sixth positional parameter last name, Like that, you can see the binding parameters. And here you can see select star from users where first name equal to question mark and last name equal to question mark. And the binding parameter in first position, it is passing Roy, which is the first name value. And binding parameter 2 passing P, which is last name value. Now we will see how to use advanced like expressions. Here I have defined the method find user by keyword, and I am passing first name keyword, and this method returns a list of user entity. And in this method I have applied a query annotation, and the query is select star from users where first name like I am passing the keyword, and if any user's first name contains the particular keyword, it will return the list of user entity, and native query is true. To test this method, here I have written JUnit test case method. The method name is test find user by keyword, and here I have defined the keyword as n, and here I am calling find user by keyword method of user repository object, and passing the keyword, and this method returns user entity list, and here I am asserting it should not be null, and size of the user entity list should be 2, and using for each loop I am getting each first name and displaying that, and also I am asserting the first name contains the keyword is n. Empty the database before run the JUnit test case. Select the JUnit test case. Now I am going to run this JUnit test case in debug mode. It returns two user entity objects, and here you can see we got Arun and John. If you see, it contains the keyword n. And here you can see the JUnit test case has been passed. Now we will see how to select specific columns from the table. Suppose say the table has 6 or 7 columns, and from that if you want to select only 2 columns, we will see how to do that. Here I have defined the method find first name and last name by email, and passing email ID as the parameter, and this method returns list of object array, and in this method I have applied query annotation, and here I have written the native SQL query. Select first name comma last name from users table where email equal to email ID. This should match with this param annotation whatever name we have given, and native query equal to true. To test this method, here I have defined the JUnit test method. The method name is test find first name and last name by email. Here I am calling find first name and last name by email method of user repository object, and passing the email ID, and this method returns list of object array, that I am asserting it should not be null. And in for each loop, I am getting each object array and getting the first name and last name, and I am asserting the first name and last name should not be null, and also I am printing the first name and last name. Before run the JUnit test case, empty the database. Now I am going to run this JUnit test case in debug mode. And here we got first name Roy and last name P. And this JUnit test case has been passed. Click on refresh. And in user table, we have 3 records. And we got first name and last name related to this email ID, which is Roy, and last name as P. Now we will see update SQL query example. Here I have defined the method update email verification token, which accept 2 parameters, token and email ID. And in this method, I have applied query annotation, and here I have given update query. Update users set email verification token and passing the named parameter, which is token, that should be equal to this value, and where email equal to email ID, and this named parameter name should match to this one, and this is native SQL query, so native query equal to true. For update the record or delete the record, we have to use modifying annotation and transactional annotation. To test this method, here I have defined one JUnit test method, which is test update email verification token. Here I have defined the token, and here I am calling update email verification token method of user repository object, and passing the token and the email ID. Based on this email ID, the particular user token will be updated. Then I am calling find by email method of user repository object and passing the email ID. It returns user entity object. Then I am asserting the email verification token of this particular user entity object should equal to the token which we have passed to the update method. Empty the database before run the JUnit test case. Select this JUnit method and run as JUnit test. Here you can see the JUnit test case has been passed. Click on refresh. And in users table, here you can see the verification token has been updated. You can get Java source code link for each video in the description section of the video. Here you can see the description section. Click on show more, and here you can see the Java source code links. Click on these links to get the Java source code.